As I said, this is only another part of the puzzle. And even though it tells us significant information, we still have more questions than we have answers at this time. And we will continue to press forward and persist, Christine and Elmore, with getting the answers to these questions. Because yes, we will persist.
His son's throat was missing pieces before the family's own pathologist ever got to examine him. And the reason why is something Ben Crump wants answers for right now. If you're new here, welcome to Crime Files. Hit subscribe and tap that bell right now. Because if you leave without doing that, you're going to miss the next case. And trust me, you don't want to miss what we cover on this channel. Okay, let's get into it. For over 2 weeks, this family sat in limbo, not knowing how their 18-year-old son died. His name is Nolan Wells, a football player from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, who disappeared during a 4th of July boat trip to Horn Island and was found dead 2 days later. If you've watched our earlier videos on this case, you already know the timeline. Today, we're doing something different. We're going deep into the one document everyone has been waiting on, the autopsy, and we're going to walk through it piece by piece so you understand exactly what it does and doesn't tell us. On Wednesday, July 22nd, at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago, in a room packed shoulder to shoulder, attorney Ben Crump finally stood up and read the findings of the independent autopsy that Nolan's family had commissioned. Let's slow down and actually walk through what that report says, because there's a lot here and every single detail matters. First, the headline. The cause of death and the manner of death are both officially listed as undetermined, pending further investigation. Not drowning, not homicide, not natural causes, undetermined. That word alone tells you the pathologist looked at everything available to him and still could not confidently draw a conclusion. And when you understand why, this case gets a lot more complicated, not less. The pathologist who conducted this exam is Dr. Robert Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist with no ties whatsoever to Mississippi law enforcement. That matters, because the family didn't trust that the state's own examiner would give them a fully independent answer. So they flew Nolan's body all the way to Washington, D.C., paid for in part by former NFL player Colin Kaepernick, just so someone completely outside of that system could look at the evidence with fresh eyes. Think about what that decision actually says. This is a grieving family, still in the middle of the worst days of their lives, and instead of just accepting whatever the state told them, they made the deliberate choice to fly their son's body across the country for a second opinion. That alone tells you how much distrust had already built up between this family and local authorities, even before a single autopsy result came back. So what did Dr. Mitchell actually find? Let's start with what wasn't there. No broken bones anywhere on Nolan's body. No obvious bruising visible on the skin. If you're picturing some dramatic sign of a struggle, some clear injury that screams what happened, that's not what this report shows. On the surface, it doesn't look like Nolan was severely beaten or physically overpowered in some obvious way. But here's where it gets complicated, and where a lot of people online jump to conclusions too fast. Dr. Mitchell explained that by the time this independent exam happened, Nolan's body had already decomposed significantly. 2 days in Gulf water, followed by time before the independent team could get to him, means normal signs like bruising can become incredibly hard, sometimes impossible, to detect on skin that's already broken down. So the absence of visible bruising doesn't necessarily mean there was no trauma. It might just mean decomposition erased evidence of it. That's a critical distinction, and it's exactly why the manner of death couldn't be confidently labeled as an accident. I want you to really sit with that for a second, because this is the part that gets misunderstood the most whenever autopsy results come out in cases like this. People see no broken bones and no bruising and assume that means nothing happened. But forensic pathology doesn't work like that. A body that's been in warm Gulf water for even a short time starts to change quickly. Skin discoloration from decomposition can mask real injuries. Soft tissue swelling can hide the kind of marks you'd expect to see if someone were, say, grabbed, held down, or struck. So when a pathologist says he can't rule something in or out, it's not indecision. It's honesty about the limitations of what the body could still tell him. Then came the detail that made the entire room go quiet. Dr. Mitchell found a patch of reddish discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. Crump described it as roughly the size of a small notebook, tucked in the lower part of the skull. Underneath that discoloration, there was no skull fracture, no cuts or lacerations on the skin above it, just that one strange patch of color, sitting there unexplained. Now, Crump was careful here, and I want to be just as careful relaying it to you. He didn't stand up and declare that this proves Nolan was struck in the head. He acknowledged something medically important, that this kind of discoloration can sometimes occur naturally, simply from how a body is positioned after death, blood settling in one place due to gravity. In forensic pathology, that's actually a well-documented process. It happens after death regardless of how someone died, simply because blood stops circulating and starts a pool wherever gravity pulls it. So this detail alone isn't proof of an attack. But Crump also said the opposite is just as true. This discoloration cannot be fully ruled out as something else either. It could be from an impact. It could be from the body hitting something in the water, maybe rocks, maybe a boat, maybe simply the shifting sand and current along the shoreline. It could be completely unrelated to how Nolan died. The independent exam simply cannot tell us which one it is. And that uncertainty is exactly why the manner of death remains open, instead of being closed out as a simple drowning. This is a tightrope that independent pathologists have to walk in cases like this. They can't say more than the evidence allows, even when families desperately want a clear answer. Dr. Mitchell didn't say Nolan was murdered. He also didn't say Nolan simply drowned with no other explanation. He said, based on everything in front of him, he genuinely cannot tell you which one it was. And if you're a parent sitting in that room listening to those words about your own child, that has to be one of the hardest sentences to hear. Then Crump revealed something that raised even more questions about how this investigation has been handled. When Nolan's body arrived for the independent autopsy, certain components of his throat were missing, not decomposed. Missing, because the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office had already removed them during their own official examination in order to run separate testing. Now, on its own, that's not automatically sinister. Medical examiners routinely retain organs or tissue samples for toxicology and further lab work. That's a normal part of forensic investigation. Structures in the neck and throat, for example, are often examined closely in cases involving water deaths, because pathologists want to check for any signs consistent with strangulation, or conversely, signs that support drowning, like fluid in certain tissues. So it's entirely possible this was a completely standard step in the state's own process. But Crump made clear that his team wants full transparency on exactly what that tissue testing shows, and why the family wasn't given a complete picture of what had already been taken before their own doctor examined him. For a family that's already stated multiple times that they don't trust they're getting the whole truth from local authorities, this detail didn't help ease that tension. It deepened it. Imagine finding out, after the fact, that a part of your child's body had already been taken for testing you weren't told about, before your own chosen doctor even got the chance to look. So, let's put this together and think about what it actually means. We have no broken bones, no visible bruising, though decomposition may have hidden it. Unexplained discoloration at the back of the head that could mean nothing or could mean something. And missing throat tissue that the family didn't know had already been taken before their own independent exam began. Individually, none of these facts prove a crime happened, but together, they explain exactly why a trained, independent, board-certified pathologist looked at all of it and still wrote the word undetermined. And that word matters more than people realize. In forensic pathology, undetermined isn't a shrug. It's not the doctor saying, I don't know, so let's move on. It's a formal, deliberate conclusion that means the evidence available genuinely does not point clearly enough toward one specific cause, not accident, not homicide, not natural causes, to responsibly rule the others out. For a case that Jackson County Sheriff has publicly leaned toward calling an accidental drowning, an independent expert declining to confirm, that is a significant statement on its own. Remember, Mississippi authorities said early on that no foul play was suspected, before toxicology, before any official cause of death had even been established. Crump has openly questioned that rush to judgment, saying his concern is that local officials may be looking to close this out quickly instead of following every possible lead. And as of right now, more than 2 weeks after Nolan's body was found, the state's own official autopsy still has not been released to public. We don't have their toxicology. We don't have their final conclusion. All we have so far is this one independent report raising more questions than it answers. It's also worth remembering the current around Horn Island have a real, documented history of causing drownings, even for strong swimmers, which is part of why local officials lean toward that explanation early on. That's not nothing, and it's part of why some people, including some of Nolan's own friends, believe this ultimately was a tragic accident and nothing more. But an independent pathologist reviewing the same body couldn't confidently land there either, and that gap between what officials suggested early and what an outside expert is willing to confirm is exactly what's keeping this case in the national spotlight. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has already confirmed that once the full investigation wraps up, everything will go before a grand jury, a panel of everyday citizens who will decide if there's enough evidence to support any criminal charges. A joint inspection of Nolan's phone is also being arranged between Crump's team and law enforcement, so both sides can examine together, transparently, side by side, something Crump specifically pushed for because of concerns that messages had already been deleted from that phone before the family got their hands on it. So here's what I want you to actually sit with, now that we've walked through this autopsy piece by piece. If Dr. Mitchell couldn't confidently rule out foul play, why did authorities publicly suggest early on that none was suspected? What does that unexplained discoloration on the back of Nolan's head actually mean? And will we ever get conclusive answer? And why did the family learn that parts of their son's body had already been taken for testing without being told beforehand? We still don't have the state's official autopsy. We still don't have toxicology results. And we still don't have a confirmed cause of death more than 2 weeks later. But what we do know now is that an independent, respected pathologist looked at all the evidence and refused to call this a simple accident. If this case has you thinking, drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you believe that discoloration really means. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files with that bell icon turned on, because we're going to keep following this case as it develops, and you do not want to miss what comes next.